So what are Ukraine and Europe up to again? Today we will talk about weapons, about armament, but above all about the shift in the thinking of generals and politicians, and actually in the strategy of our army and our armies. So, not our Czech army, that's actually the problem and the reason why I'm going to talk about this today, but for example, in the minds of the French, Estonians, or the British. It starts with Zelensky basically presenting us with Ukraine's weapons, his aura farms, if I can put it that way, and showing us everything that has been developed during the war and what is helping Ukraine actually fight the war, win the war, in terms of the fact that Russia is not achieving its goals. And here we have to specify one thing. If you accept that America is losing the war with Iran, then you also have to accept that Russia is losing the war with Ukraine. However, if you claim that Russia is winning the war with Ukraine, then it's only logical to claim that the United States is winning the war with Iran as well. I would say that you can't stay consistent and, for example, just say that the United States is winning against Iran and Russia is losing against Ukraine, or that Russia is winning against Ukraine and the United States is losing against Iran. Those situations, the position of the great power or the stronger force against the weaker force, seem quite similar to me. In other words, for different reasons, but the position seems quite similar to me. However, as for why Ukraine, according to Zelensky and many others, is winning, mainly because it has preserved its existence, which in itself is a victory. Of course, there are drones. Then he presents the Flamingo missile, which has flown a few times and hit something. Then he shows Neptunes, he shows other missiles, he shows more drones. Even ground drones are on the scene, loitering munitions, which are the loitering AI munitions. And above all, it's him speaking and saying that the arms manufacturers are the best and that they're really cool and so on and so forth. However, why is this video important? This video is important because it introduces us to the weapons that are crucial in this type of war. And here it's important to realize two things. First, war has truly changed. Different means will be used and new, more sophisticated means have been added. And these means are primarily loitering munitions, FPV drones, but also drones that serve the same role as Shaheds. In other words, this is a new element in this war. In Ukraine, this element is extremely important. It's an outright game changer. Why? Because in the Ukrainian-Russian war, it's not possible to use, for example, the tactic of air dominance. And that's because neither side has a strong enough air force to outnumber and destroy the other side's air defenses. Or on the other hand, to put such pressure that it would basically mean a catastrophe for the air force of one side or the other. So that's a major distinguishing feature of this war. Another specific feature of this war is Ukrainian geography, namely the flat terrain. Flat terrain, few hills, very open landscape. When you look at it from above, there are few places to hide behind a hill, a mountain, or a terrain irregularity, and so on. These are simply specifics of the Ukrainian war that give drones enormous power and influence. In no other war, probably, that might be fought on the European continent, between Russia and Poland, between the European Union and Russia, between Turkey and Greece, it doesn't really matter, would drones be this crucial. But that doesn't mean you can't count on them or that you shouldn't take them into account. You have to take them into account, you have to include them in your defense, and that's why we're going to see what's happening here. Yeah, one important message, because the Ukrainians have all these weapons, we're also getting information from Russia that basically they're succeeding in causing more and more civilian deaths. This is one of those aspects of this war where you might say both sides are the same, right? Well, they're not really, because while the Ukrainians have caused civilian deaths among Russians in the hundreds, the Russians have caused civilian deaths among Ukrainians in the thousands. So really, no, both sides haven't caused the same problem. I just wanted to say that in recent months, Russian civilian casualties have been increasing because Ukraine's ability to attack Russia has also been growing. In the past month, in March, the Ukrainians sent more drones into Russia than the Russians sent into Ukraine, which is also an interesting aspect. And besides that, as the number of attacks is obviously increasing, civilian casualties are also rising. But at the same time, I would say that Ukrainians no longer have as many scruples about attacking targets where there is a high probability that civilians will be present. Yeah, from time to time it hits a power plant, from time to time it hits a freight station, and from time to time it even hits a residential building if it's shot down badly. And of course, Ukrainians could fly somewhere where they don't endanger civilians, but I would say they just don't care as much anymore. So in this regard, or rather, it doesn't bother them as much as it used to, especially considering that the mentality in Europe and the United States has also shifted regarding what we are or aren't willing to tolerate. We've simply matured a bit in realizing that you can't wage war nicely, especially against the Russians, especially when you're poorer and have a smaller army overall. And sometimes you have to resort to dirtier tactics if you want to survive. Nevertheless, yes, the Ukrainians are pulling this off and can do it mainly thanks to the weapons that Zelensky is showing us here. But now let's talk about what impact this has. The impact is, for example, that the United Kingdom is reconsidering its armored brigades or its armored strength. They will be switching from Challenger 2 to Challenger 3, and the transition will be such that originally they wanted to modernize 200 tanks. At this moment, they've reconsidered the situation and only 148 tanks will be modernized. So why do they have to change those formations and change the doctrine of tank warfare? It's because, simply put, they'll have fewer tanks, so they have to regroup those regiments, they have to adjust them, they have to say, look, they won't look like this, they'll look like this. But the fact that the British Army will have fewer tanks doesn't necessarily mean it will be weaker, because they're actually switching to a new model of tank formations, namely one where those tank formations will include more drone assets. Yes, so it won't just be a tank squad and some armored squad, but those tank formations will include drone assets that will be part of the group. There will be attack drones as well as reconnaissance drones, and the tanks themselves will be highly sophisticated in terms of electronics, sensors, battlefield awareness, and situational overview. They'll be like armored computers, like armored information centers. And based on that, even though there will be fewer tanks, the combat power should increase given the demands of the modern battlefield. So, less blind and dull armor, which is defenseless when drones come in, but more information, more battlefield awareness, more eyes. That's what the British are going for. Another thing the British are dusting off or turning to right now is the so-called war book. This is something that would be extremely useful for us and that we should implement or create in the Czech Republic. What is a war book? A war book is something the British basically had gathering dust, discontinued. They didn't really use it. It wasn't active. And it was something they discontinued because they didn't expect that there could be a war in Europe. But now they're bringing it back because they expect that there could be a war in Europe, that Britain could theoretically be attacked, could enter a state of war. And the Wartime Manual is basically a manual on how to proceed in the event of a state of war. But it's not just a manual for the army, it's a manual for doctors, for police officers, for officials. It's a way for the state to communicate with companies at that moment. It's the connection between the arms industry and the state, as well as other industries and the state. In short, it's a comprehensive process, a comprehensive way to kickstart the defense of the islands. This is something we would really need in the Czech Republic as well, because we don't have anything like that. We don't have any such wartime manual, any such manual that would start telling all the other components of the state, as well as the private sectors, how they should behave, what they should do, what their role is in case the country is attacked. We don't have anything like that. We should develop it. We should expand cooperation between the state and the private sector, raise awareness among people, companies, but also officials, police officers, firefighters, and, as far as I know, medical workers about what they should do, how they should behave, and what their role is in case the state is attacked, in case war is declared. I'm convinced that if the Czech Republic were attacked right now, everyone here would be running around like confused chickens and would have absolutely no idea what to do. Instead of continuing to do their police work, I bet some police officers would panic a bit and wonder, damn, should I enlist now? Or should I stay here and do my city cop job? Or should I go be a police officer somewhere on the front line? Or what exactly is my job? The firefighters would say, okay, they're probably going to bomb us. Are we supposed to respond to bombings like a regular emergency? Or is it some different protocol? Should we report to the army or stay as a fire defense unit? In our city, the doctors were the same. Just a lot of confusion. No one would know how to act. Everything would just be cobbled together on the fly, and once again, we'd be best in war. Yeah. So maybe it would be good to come up with some procedure for how to behave in such situations, even for the Czech Republic. We really have a habit of neglecting everything and only then, during the crisis, trying to cobble together some law or something while it's still going on. And then we're relatively prepared for the next crisis of this type. But the problem is that you can do this when it's a COVID pandemic, which mostly kills people, but it's not the plague. You can do it when there's an economic crisis, because the worst that can happen is that you lose some money. But when there's a war, that's something you should probably already have prepared. I'm just pointing that out. Inspiration for the Czech Republic. Let's look for it in Britain. We looked there for inspiration when it came to Brexit, for something so stupid. But when it comes to a good idea like the war book, the British do whatever they want, and we just want peace. Naive, terribly naive. However, we talked about how armies are arming themselves, and not only are the British changing their tank and armored units, but of course the British also have allies, and those allies are the Estonians. Estonia, a digital IT hub, and which at this moment is moving away from relying on armored forces and understands that a small country with a small population must have total technological dominance if it even wants to consider the possibility of defending itself. Yeah, Estonia has very few inhabitants, less than 5 million. They don't even have the kind of defense capacities to draw on, like, for example, Slovakia or Finland, a very weak country. And for that reason, they are massively investing in drones and air defense, in what actually makes sense to buy right now and what can really improve the country's ability to defend itself. They plan to spend 500 million euros on more CV-90s and on modernizing the existing CV-90s. But instead, they realized that delivering those CV-90s would take a long time. They realized that Russia, their neighbor, they realized that hybrid operations in the Narva region are no joke, and they realized that the violations of Estonian airspace, which the Russians keep doing, are also not something to be taken lightly. And that's why drones and air defense, that will instantly increase Estonia's defense capability. Drones and air defense can be delivered relatively quickly, especially the kind of air defense that isn't the most sophisticated. And at this moment, you could say that Estonia is replacing manpower with robotic systems. They are quite strong leaders in the field of ground combat drones as well. And I would say that over time, we will be able to learn quite a lot from Estonia when it comes to dealing with the issue of having a shortage of human resources. The Czech Republic doesn't have a shortage of manpower, but it does have a shortage of available manpower that could work for defense. And for that reason, we might be able to draw inspiration not only from Britain's military playbook, not only from Britain in how it organizes its armored units, battalions, but also, for example, from Estonia in how it approaches the fact that it doesn't have enough people, using robots. Look, when you don't have enough people in a car factory, when you don't have enough people at Skoda, you buy robots and drones. When you don't have enough people in the army, you should use robots there too. There's no reason not to use robots today. Drones, drones, drones. Of course, a soldier is great. It's important to have soldiers, but one drone with a machine gun in Ukraine can sometimes hold an entire section for several days. So that's something we need to realize. Of course, the drone with the machine gun is controlled by a soldier somewhere in the background. It's not an automated system, but such a soldier can control, say, 10 of these machine gun drones, and just one soldier like that has 10 drones and covers an entire section of the front. So effectively, one soldier, just by sitting at a computer somewhere and using a gamepad to decide who shoots when, has 10 monitors and an overview of the battlefield. He even gets alerts if something moves somewhere because the drone sensor picks it up, so he just sends fire there. And one soldier, thanks to 10 drones, can do the work that would otherwise require a whole platoon or 100 soldiers or something like that. This robotization is something that can significantly help not only Estonia, but also the Czech Republic to increase their defense capabilities. But it costs money, right? It costs money that we have to spend on bribing voters. So there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing we can do about it. Another point regarding armament. Latvia, admittedly a bit old school, with its fortifications and 200 Patria armored vehicles. Patria armored vehicles are great armored vehicles, and Latvia knows it. Latvia will buy 200 of them, and at the same time, production is moving to Latvia, so if the Latvians were attacked or needed to quickly produce more armored vehicles or repair them, they have it at home and don't have to rely on external deliveries. This localization of defense and attracting know-how and production to the countries that order these weapons, that seems to me like a very, very good idea. And for that reason, it seems like a very bad idea. For example, what is being done with our air defense, namely that we are buying missiles from Israel, but actually building an Israeli factory here. For air defense missiles, that's not really happening. So now with the new government, it would be good to push a bit so that all the weapons our army uses and has are at least partially produced in our country. So that there are factories here where these things can be produced when we really need them. And besides that, I would completely forget about Israel because they have enough of their own problems right now and absolutely don't have the capacity to supply anyone from their own country. So if they don't build a factory here to produce what we want to buy, I wouldn't buy it from them at all and would look for something else. So that's that. So Latvia, the Patria armored vehicle. By the way, the Patria armored vehicle, when we start considering how to expand our fleet of armored vehicles, what to replace the Pandours with, or how to increase the number of Pandours, the Patria armored vehicle seems to me like one of the best options currently available on the European continent. I'd definitely choose the Patria armored vehicles. And then, of course, we have another thing here which concerns another one of our allies, and that's France, which is transitioning to a wartime economy. Effectively, it means they're going to pour a lot of money into production, and production of what? Production of drones. Again, France is also moving towards drone warfare, towards a drone-based way of thinking about the battlefield. And besides that, there's also an interesting thing about France, and that's the diversification of the decision-making process, speeding up the arming of units because the army is introducing something like an e-shop for armaments. So, to put it simply, it will be an app where commanders of various regiments and so on will be able to choose what they need to buy, so the army will have a perfect overview of what each unit needs, and then it will just be ordered. It will be very dynamic, it will be very fast, and it's a system that's basically taken from Ukraine, this wartime procurement system. So that means it's tested, it makes sense to do it this way on the battlefield, and thanks to that, the units can get what they need very quickly. And at the headquarters and in the state, simply at the center of power and decision-making, they know exactly what the soldiers are missing, what the soldiers want, and what they can use to protect their lives or to maximize their combat effectiveness. Of course, you could argue here, but what if the soldiers start ordering things and then selling them off? Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. That's definitely a risk. On the other hand, when soldiers are in a combat situation, I dare say they're more likely to think about how to equip themselves as best as possible to have combat effectiveness, to be able to defend themselves against the enemy, or to make an offensive operation as easy as possible and to lose as few men as possible, rather than thinking about ordering things they don't need just to sell them off somewhere, right? I'd say that when your life is in danger, you're more likely to think about how not to be in danger rather than how to save up for a new Octavia. That's my argument. So that's how it is, ladies and gentlemen. This is the current direction of military and weapons development across Europe. Not a single one of these things I've just listed today is being systematically done by the Czech Republic, which brutally weakens us. And I ask you to start putting pressure on your MPs, write them a letter, on your senators, on your government, on social media, and in private correspondence, so that they take inspiration from Britain, Estonia, France, Latvia, and other militarily successful countries and stop neglecting our defense capability. There are a lot of things there that, for the most part, don't cost that much money and can increase our defense capability, or at least the feeling of being defensible, by a lot, by many, many percent. It's about introducing a war manual, setting up an online shop for procurement, and integrating more drone systems into armored convoys. That's what we need. And that's what doesn't have to cost billions. And that's what could move the Czech army into the 21st century. And maybe I'd almost start considering that we should stop teaching our soldiers bayonet charges in basic training. So that's another thing I might start considering, that bayonet charges across a minefield in broad daylight is kind of an outdated tactic, so maybe I'd just drop it. So that's that. Ladies and gentlemen, please let me know what you think about it. See you again in the next video, and take care until then. Oh, and I'm especially interested in the opinions of soldiers and, if possible, officers, if any of you are here, so you can tell me what you think about this combat e-shop, or about the state of our army and how much you think it should be inspired, for example, by Britain or even Ukraine, France, or the Baltic states. So that's it. Yeah, that's all. Take care, support the channel, like, share, and see you next time.